Hey guys, so this is the part 2 of your notes. It's not part 2 of that first lesson, but it's part 2 of your notes. So you're just going to kind of fill in the second part of your notes, which should be energy pyramid. So as I'm going through the video, pause it as you need to and make sure you fill in your notes. Okay, so the first part of your notes, we're going to talk about some of these words that are in the word bank. They'll be in there. We'll address them. Okay, so the first thing that you're going to want to write on your notes somewhere in a blank space is that energy is neither created or destroyed, it just changes states. So the big thing here is, let's say that I eat some lettuce. I'm not creating new energy inside of my body, I'm just transferring the energy from the lettuce into my body. So I'm not creating it, it's already there for me, it's just being transformed into my body. Okay, and then another thing that we're going to learn during this energy pyramid is that 90% of energy is lost as heat. So what that means is plants can sit out in the sun and gain their energy from the sun, so they get 100% of the energy from the sun. But the first primary consumer that is going to be eating the plants has to work hard to find its food. Right? So it has to move about, it has to move its muscles, it has to walk, it has to go find food. So by doing so, you're losing 90% of your energy just in heat out of your body to only gain 10% of it back by actually eating the plant. And so as you go further and further up the food pyramid, there's more and more energy that's lost because you're having to work harder and harder to get your food. So let's give an example of a hawk at the top of the food chain. A hawk actually has to fly and look and search for food and maybe even strangle its food to try and kill it. So there's a lot of work that has to go into actually eating its prey. And so 90% of that energy is lost to only gain 10% of it back from actually eating that animal. So when you're at the top of the food pyramid, you have to kind of eat a lot more to be able to gain energy for your body. Okay, so let's just continue here. 10% of the energy is transferred through each of the food pyramid levels. So we're going to label, just like we would a food web or food chain, we're going to label our pyramid. So at the very bottom, the very base, we've got our producers, right? That's the bigger amount. We have a large amount of plants. Our autotrophs and producers, same things. They automatically make their own food from the sun. They produce their own food. Those are going to be at the base, at the bottom of our pyramid. And then next we have the primary consumers. The primary consumers, remember, are those that eat the producers. Okay, and then one level up from that is our secondary consumers, and then our tertiary consumers. Okay, the top of our food pyramid. Okay, and so remembering that they're going to ask you on the star, it may be phrased in a certain way, is what is lost at each trophic level? Well, 90% of heat or energy is lost at each trophic level. So how do we lose that? From sweating, from heat through our body. Every time that we get heated, our body is losing energy, right? So as you're running on the treadmill or doing some sort of football activity or sports activity, you're losing energy by doing that. And that's why it's good to eat and continue, gain your strength, gain your energy so that you have enough energy to play football or to play sports. Same thing here. So 90% of your energy is being lost at each level. So by primary consumers having to eat the producers, they're losing 90% of heat to only gain 10% of it back by eating that organism, the plant. Okay, and these are some numbers. So 100% of the energy is consumed by producers. So producers get 100% of their energy from the sun. And 10% is what is gained from that primary energy. So 90% of it was lost at the trophic level. And then again, another 90% of it is lost. So secondary consumers only get 1% of the initial energy from the plants, right? Because they're further up the pyramid, they've lost a lot of heat. And then at the tertiary level, they only gain 0.1% of the total energy from consuming an organism because they've lost 90% of secondary consumer energy. So if you look, the percentages are just 90% lower at each pyramid level. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is switch to a different screen. I'm going to kind of give you, let's see if there's anything else that I want to add on to this. No. So make sure you pause it, fill in all these things, and I'll kind of talk to you about how some questions are addressed with food pyramids. So I'm going to get onto a paint screen. Let me get onto that. All right, so let's say that a star question pops up and tells you if you have a certain amount of joules, which is energy in organisms. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and draw a pyramid. Producer, primary consumer, secondary consumer, tertiary consumer. So let's say that the question says that the producers have 2,342 joules of energy. What that means is that's how much energy is consumed from the sun, or is transferred from the sun into the plant. So that number can also be written as 2,342.0, right? That's the same number. If you just put 0.0 behind it, it's the same thing. So a trick that you need to learn is that as you go up the food pyramid, the decimal is going to go to the left. As you go down the food pyramid, the decimal is going to go to the right. So the number should get smaller as you go up the food pyramid, and the number should get bigger as you go down the food pyramid. So just like a pyramid is smaller at the top, bigger at the bottom, same thing. So let's say if they say, okay, there's 2,342 joules at the producer level, at the producer. How many joules are going to be at the secondary consumer level? So what you would do is, okay, we got our producers down here, our primary consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary consumers. So you are going to need to go up the food pyramid. So that means your decimal is going to need to move to the left. So what you do with this decimal is you move the decimal to the left. Okay, so now your number for primary consumers is going to be 234.2. See, all I did was move that decimal over one time because I went up one level. And now the question was all about the secondary consumer. Okay, so then I would move the decimal one more time to the left. So now my number is going to be 23.42. Okay, so that's pretty much it. You're just moving that decimal, and that's helping you to change it by 90% at each level. So you're not actually having to calculate anything. You're just moving that decimal from left to right. So I'm going to go ahead and erase this, and I'm going to do another example. Let's see if there's an easier way to erase this. All right, so we've got another pyramid here that I'm just going to practice one more time with you. So let's say that they tell you we have 43 joules at the tertiary level. Okay, let's go through and let's label one more time. We have our producers, primary consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary consumers. So they're telling you you have 43 joules at the tertiary consumer level. So again, that number can be wrote as 43.0, same number. Okay, and so now, since we're going to go down the food pyramid, our decimal needs to move to the right. If we were going to go up, it would need to move to the left, but the only way we can go is down, okay, in this scenario. So let's see how many would be at the secondary consumer level. So we're going to go down one level, so our decimal is going to move over to the right. So now our number is 430, okay? So now we're going to go down one more level to primary consumer, and our decimal's going to move over one more. So now our number is 4,300 or 4,300. Okay, and then if we're going to go down even one more level, we've got to move that decimal one more level over. So now our number is 43,000. See how the number is much smaller at the top of the pyramid and much bigger at the bottom of the pyramid? That's always going to be the trend. So if you get to a specific question where they're asking you what would be at the secondary consumer level, first you can weed out the other answers by saying, okay, this one's a bigger number, this one's a smaller number, and you can take those out. Okay, so now I'm going to flip to the other, go back to the PowerPoint and finish that. We have some practice questions really quick. Alrighty, so here's a food web. Same thing as the food pyramid. It has our producers, primary consumers. What I want you guys to start becoming more comfortable with is labeling food webs. So here we've got, let's see if I can add a pin here. We've got our producers, right? At the bottom, we've got our producers. Then we've got our primary consumers, secondary consumers. Producer, primary consumer, secondary consumer. Producer, primary consumer, still a secondary consumer for the fox. Producer grains, grasshopper is going to be the primary consumer, and the owls are going to be the secondary consumer. Okay, again, going back to the grains, the grain is the producer, the mice, that's going to be your primary consumer, and the owl again will be the secondary consumer. Now there's many different ways that you can go here, but let's start with question number 1. If the grass begins with 5,981 joules of energy, how many joules of energy would the owl receive? So you got to kind of think of that pyramid in your head and say, okay, so if the grass right here has 5,981, that's just like writing 5,981.0, and how many joules would the owl receive? So going from the grass to the owl is going to be, so grass is producer, grasshopper's primary consumer, and the owl is a secondary consumer. So you're going to have to go up 1, 2 levels. You're going up, which means you're moving your decimal to the left. So your answer is going to be going 1, 2. So your decimal is going to be right in between the right in between the 9 and the 8. So your answer, this is not going to be your answer, but your answer is 59.81, because just like that pyramid, right? If we start out with 5981.0, this would be, move 1 over, 59.8.1, 59.81, and then 5.981. Okay, and this would be your producer, primary consumer, secondary consumer. And that's why our answer is 59.81. And then you go on to answer the other questions. Which organism would both be a secondary consumer and a tertiary consumer? I didn't do any tertiary consumers, so let's see. We've got, okay, so here's one. Your your producer, primary consumer, secondary consumer, and your tertiary consumer. So technically the owl can be a primary and secondary. So owl. And what is missing from the food web above? So it's something that tends to always be missed from a food web or food chain, and that's your decomposers. Okay, so I know you guys don't have a paper for this. This is just something for you to kind of follow along with. Believe me, I know that this is a lot, but I'm hoping after 3 days of learning it that you guys can be successful with it on a quiz or a test. All right, and the last question, I hope you guys can see it down here, is which organism receives less energy than the bird? Okay, so here's our bird. Which one receives less energy from the bird? Well, remember that as we go up, we get less and less energy, so it's going to be something above the bird. So it would most likely be the arrows pointing at the fox, because the fox eats the bird. So it would be the fox. The fox is receiving even less energy from eating the bird. Okay, as we go down, you get more and more energy, but as you go up, you're losing energy. So that would be your fox.